SwayamPrabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello friends, welcome to the class of Maritime Law. I am Dr. Ashutosh Acharya, Senior Assistant Professor, Law Center 2, Faculty of Law, University of Delhi. Today I welcome you to the lecture number 15th, and we will discuss in this lecture marine pollution by oil. In the next lecture also we will be continuing to discuss marine pollution, but by hazardous substances. So today the focus with respect to marine pollution would be on oil. Now why marine pollution, what is marine pollution, and how marine pollution especially by oil. Now taking into account the importance of oil in today's contemporary world, which is used as one of the most essential source of energy as far as transportation from one part of the world to another part of the world is concerned. And therefore, it is necessary that if we are utilizing this resource, we must mitigate the circumstances that lead us to pollution caused by using oil. Oil can be dispersed into seawater especially by certain kinds of discharges. These discharges may be of two kinds, may be operational or may be accidental in nature. Now, we need to mitigate the circumstances which lead to such kind of discharges or such kind of spills happening around the sea in different parts of the world. Now, why marine pollution? Now, as we will look at through this lecture, that there are different causes because of which marine pollution happens, and we will look at in detail what are these different divergent causes that leads to marine pollution, and how marine pollution we can categorize them, as I told you, into two headings, operational and accidental, and within those practices or under those aspects we see marine pollution happening. And also we will look at what is marine pollution exactly, especially when we talk about oil, and what are the measures that have been taken so far in order to curb marine pollution will be also our focus of discussion in this lecture. We will also talk about the modern developments that have happened as far as marine pollution is concerned with respect to liability regime and compensation regime. What is the nature of liability that is imposed upon the one who has polluted? What are the precautionary measures that the polluter or the prospective polluter has to undertake, or what are the precautionary measures that the flag state or the coastal states can take or are supposed to take as far as such marine pollution is concerned. So, different stakeholders are there, different liabilities and rights exist as far as these different stakeholders are concerned. It is only in the mid 20th century that we see focus towards marine pollution through oil came to the fore, because post Second World War we see the development and construction of bigger ships, transportation of oil from one part of the world to another part of the world, discovery of various offshore installations where oil could be drilled out, and many more developments that happened post Second World War can be credited to the factor of oil pollution. With development comes a lot of other prices to be paid. Pollution is one significant price that the world has already paid and continues to pay. How we can make such usage efficient so that there is no oil pollution or there is minimum oil pollution which will harm marine life to the minimum, or life at sea to the minimum, or life inside the sea to the minimum, or in fact marine pollution can affect the lives at land as well. It can adversely affect the food chain, because humans are heavily dependent upon seafood resources, and therefore, oil spill kind of situations or marine pollution kind of situations can ultimately lead to forming part of food chain, causing health hazards and what not. And therefore, it is a very important issue that has to be discussed and has been tackled and is continued to be tackled technically, legally and socially as well as politically. What are the different measures that have been taken not only in internationally, not only at international forum, but also domestically? What actions continue to be taken or have been taken will also be discussed in today's class. So, let us start with a little bit of introduction as far as oil pollution is concerned. Oil is not only the most sought after, but also the most transported commodity worldwide, and because of its physical and chemical nature, sea is the most convenient medium of transportation. Oil pollution is a recurring phenomenon and has gravest effects on marine environment as well as economic conditions of the people inhabiting the areas around the affected areas. Oil pollution of the sea began with the introduction of oil fuel in ships and increased with the carriage of oil cargo in bulk, and has been ever increasing ever since. Oil pollution might result from collision of vessels carrying oil cargo or from its bunkers. It might arise as an accidental escape or from the conscious decision of the master to lighten his stricken vessel. Tanker accidents, however, are not the only source of oil pollution. Marine based oil pollution can emanate either from ships or from offshore installations. So, as I told you that nowadays we also have offshore installations, drilling units, and when any fault happens in those installations, it ultimately leads to oil spill in the sea, and it is very difficult and a tedious task to stop that oil spill that continues to happen in a drilling area where the drilling installations has been placed. So, how to curb those particular aspects, how to be prepared as far as technical aspect is concerned, and how to be prepared as far as liability regime aspect is concerned. Already there are laws in place to deal with these aspects. Now, these laws are not too old, they are in the last 50-40 years we see, and we have seen laws getting developed as far as curbing the menace of oil pollution is concerned. Now, if you take the example of the Exxon Valdez super tanker, which was carrying approximately 12,64,155 barrels of crude oil, which ran aground on Blee Reef of Alaskan coast, spilling 11 million of gallons of crude oil into Prince William Sound, Alaska. On March 24, 1989, prior to the BP oil spill, Valdez was considered to be the largest oil spill in terms of the sheer volume discharged in the sea in the accidental. Further, the effects of oil spill are multitude in number and magnanimous in character. An oil spill contaminates seawater, natural resources and coastlines. So, friends, if you look at the water or the area of sea where oil spill has happened, there are devastating scenarios or sceneries that one can witness, leading to heavy death and injury to marine life, destruction of the marine property, not for a temporary period, but sometimes permanent damage is caused, sometimes large scale damage is caused which cannot be brought back or which cannot be restored. So, in such situation, it is pertinent that the human activity of using oil is of such an extent that it does not cause grave harm to not only human species, but all these species existing in at the globe, especially the marine species. So, an oil spill contaminates seawater, natural resources and coastlines. it adversely affects marine life if not permanently damaging it. Oil spills do not just create oily beaches, they can disrupt a broader range of ecological processes that ultimately can affect wetlands, commercial fisheries, recreation and species abundance for years to come. Individuals with business interest in the environment of the region incur loss of earning of revenue owing to the impairment of that environment. 14 international conventions and protocols provide a framework for international cooperation to combat emergency situations threatening the marine environment. They were developed in response to individual oil pollution incidents, beginning with the Torrey Canyon accident, which resulted in the escape of around 1,17,000 tons of crude oil in the western approaches of UK, causing extensive damage to the British coast and the coast of France. Now, here Torrey Canyon incident happened in 1967, wherein a tanker named Torrey Canyon started its voyage from Kuwait and was moving towards the British coast. As it was passing through the British coast or near to the British coastline, it got damaged or it met with an accident which led to oil spill in that particular area. The oil spill was so huge that it travelled to the shores of France as well as to the British shores. So, ultimately the Britishers had to take a drastic step, and that was to bombard the ship and burn the whole oil down. The salvage industry did try to solve the oil pollution or save the oil that was coming out of the tanker of the Torrey Canyon and to repair the tanker. However, it was taking time and the oil spill was so huge that an immediate measure was required to blast that particular or bombard that particular ship. Now, such instances raise concerns over the technology that we have, over the measures that we must take as far as prevention of oil pollution is concerned. Now, several measures after that we see have come into being, especially a number of conventions that have come into being for prevention of oil pollution, for creation of fund, for creation of liability upon the ship owners, issuance of certificates and best practices that must be adopted by the operators of the ship. So, we see through these incidents only we learn and move ahead. However, a concern with respect to intergenerational equity, concern based on sustainable development still resides as to how to improve upon the political will of the states in order to sign these conventions and then bring in the conventions, impose legal obligations upon the states, and then technological advancement, research and innovation, so that we can mitigate the circumstances which lead to oil pollution. The international order is principally concerned with the avoidance of accidents at sea and with regulation of the operational discharge of oil in the cleaning of ballast tanks of oil tankers. Civil liability for oil pollution has been the subject of international conventions for decades. Now, friends, what is a ballast tank? A ballast tank is a tank which is filled with water, wherein it is filled with water to maintain the balance of the ship, especially the ship that is carrying the oil from one point to another point. So, once this ballast tank is also to be cleaned, which is keeping the balance of the ship, it also leads to operational discharges. Now, we will discuss operational discharges in detail in the upcoming slides, and we will see what measures also have been taken to remove the chances of oil discharges in operational activities as far as oil tankers are concerned. The law of oil spill liability is a mixture of civil liability and criminal regimes in certain jurisdictions like the United States. The liability and fund conventions limit the liability of the ship owner in case of maritime accident causing oil pollution. Principles governing the law on oil spill liability are strict liability, channeling of liability and caps on liability limit. The issue arises as to the propriety of capping, the liability limits in the cases of oil spill, where the implications of one incident are immense. Costs involved in the cleanup are massive, and damage caused to the natural resources and private parties is also grave. Now friends, this was a general introduction that we just had as to what are the basic causes. We will discuss these causes in detail in today's class, and then we also see that what all areas have been covered legally as far as liability regime and fund regime and the compensation regime is concerned. So, let us start with understanding in detail how oil spill takes place. So, the physical properties of oil are as such that it does not mix with water. So, when large quantities of oil are discharged into the aquatic environment, a thick layer of crude oil or refined petroleum oil spreads out in a layer that hovers on top of the ocean. This release of oil into the marine environment is referred to as oil spill. The crude oil, after floating on ocean for some time, changes its properties. Some of the oil evaporates, some weathers, and some emulsifies with water to form an emulsion resembling chocolate pudding. This thickened emulsion then goes through wear and tear by wind and waves and forms tar balls. An oil spill might occur due to various causes. It could be due to an operational or accidental discharge in the sea or ocean. So, first we will look at what are operational discharges leading to or causing oil pollution. An oil spill might be caused by operational discharge from a crude oil tanker or ship. The problem is bigger in case of tankers. After the tanker has discharged its cargo, a proportion of it remains in the tanks, which is attached to the layer of the tanker, because all of the oil cannot be extracted. A particular layer still remains attached to the a layer of oil attached to the inner layer of the tanker. Now, this has to be cleaned, and when this is cleaned, automatically it will be discharging the attached oil to the inner layer of the tanker into the sea water, which leads to a minor or a smaller amount of oil, but assume hundreds and thousands of ships carrying oil and they being cleared around the globe, leading cumulatively to a higher amount of oil pollution into the sea water. So, therefore, we see that after the tanker has discharged its cargo, a proportion of oil remains in the tanks, caught mainly on the horizontal surfaces of the joists, which give the tank its structural strength. Such clingage has to be removed regularly to avoid the risk of explosion, and this was traditionally done by washing the tanks with water. This water is then to be discharged into the sea. Prior to 1960s, this was done without separating the water from oil. After the 1962 revision of the 1954 International Convention for the Prevention of Pollution of the Sea by Oil, a technical solution of the oil discharge problem was designed by the oil industry. The process so designed is called load on top (LOT), which is an excellent anti-oil pollution device. However, not all the tankers have adopted the device due to some practical difficulties. Other than tankers, vessels which burn bunker C or other heavy fuel oil face the problem of fuel oil purification. During the course of a voyage, the purification of the fuel oil produces a quantity of sludge which is stored in sludge tanks, but eventually has to be discharged to a shore reception facility or to the sea. Also, almost inevitably, pumps, tanks and machinery leak small quantities of various types of oil, mainly lubricating oil. This can amount to appreciable quantity. Disposal of oily ballast is also a problem that many dry cargo ships face. This problem arises where the vessel has to use its bunker tanks for water ballast to ensure stability. The oily ballast is normally discharged only when the vessel is nearing port. The International Convention for the Prevention of Pollution of the Sea by Oil 1954, adopted under the auspices of IMCO, which later became IMO in 1982, recognized that most oil pollution resulted from routine shipboard operations such as the cleaning of cargo tanks. Oil Poll 1954 prohibited the dumping of oily waste within a certain distance from land and in special areas where the danger to the environment was especially acute. In 1962, the limits were extended by means of an amendment adopted at a conference organized by IMO. So, we see prior to Torrey Canyon some steps were taken, such as oil poll came into being, it allowed for certain restrictions and cleaning technology. The ships did not also, certain ships adopted it, but many of the ships did not adopt those change in technology. But we see a significant change comes into being only after Torrey Canyon incident, as we also see that oil poll got converted into MARPOL, and the focus was not only upon the reduction of oil discharge into the sea, but also now was to protect the marine environment at the same time, and that too in a larger quantitative and qualitative manner. Another type of discharge, friends, that we see is, apart from operational discharges, is accidental discharges, where accidents are caused. So, if an accident of an oil tanker is caused, it will automatically lead to oil spill into the sea, or if there is an offshore installation which is involved in the production of an oil, then if any mishap happens, if any accident happens in that installation, also we can see accidental discharges happening. Now, how to curb, what is the law that takes care of such discharges, what precautionary measures to be taken, and then what polluter pays measures to be taken. Both the measures now are in place as far as different conventions are concerned. So, we will see what are those measures under the different conventions in the upcoming slides. Accidental discharges or accidental spillage of oil from ships occur either in association with an operational procedure aboard ship or with an accident to the vessel. Examples of accidents that might occur during operational procedure are while loading or discharging oil cargo, lightening, bunkering, ballasting or deballasting. The most likely causes of accidental oil spills are grounding and ship to ship collision. Structural failures, foundering and loading and unloading errors can also cause sizable spills. In these cases, the human element which can play a role also in case of grounding and collision is particularly important. Generally, the vast majority of incidents occur in association with operational procedures aboard the ship, but the vast majority of oil spills occur as a result of accidents to the vessels. From 1967 Torrey Canyon disaster till the sinking of Chitra in the Arabian Sea in 2010, the world has witnessed many accidental spillages by ships that have shook human sensibilities from time to time. A series of tanker accidents occurred in and around US waters in the period of 1976 to 1978, the most important of them being the stranding of Argo merchant that ran aground off Massachusetts in December 1976. On March 16, 1978, the world witnessed another catastrophic accident, that of the Amoco Cadiz, which was then considered to be the worst oil spill till that time, as it destroyed marine life extensively and ruined the beaches. Exxon Valdez disaster followed in 1989, which was highly televised and led to a string of litigation and ultimately the passing of Oil Pollution Act 1990 in the United States of America. February 1999 saw the sinking of Panamanian flagged Japanese managed wood chip carrier New Carissa and 70,000 gallons of fuel spilled. In December the same year, Erika sunk off the coast of France, highlighting yet again the importance of maintenance of vessels and the need of sound international measures to check such incidents, which could have been prevented provided due care. The sinking of Prestige in 2002 of the Galician coast polluted beaches along the French and Spanish coast, highlighting yet again the question of liability in such accidents where multiple parties are involved. March 2009 witnessed the Southeast Queensland oil spill in Australia when unsecured cargo of the container vessel the Pacific Adventure went down the sea during a cyclone. So, we see all of these major accidents that happened around the globe leading to destruction of marine life and damage of property, and also obviously oil also being a natural resource also gets wasted. So, taking into account all of these major incidents in almost all the different parts of the world, no sea is left without such a spill. So, what do we see here? We see here that all of these spills gave us an impetus towards making the law more stringent, more conducive and comprehensive, so that such incidents can be protected in a future course of transaction. So, apart from vessel, offshore installations, as I told you, and gas pipelines are also major contributors to oil pollution. When an oil well is being drilled, mud is pumped down the well. These maintain a head of pressure and prevent a blowout when oil is struck. An offshore platform may suffer from a blowout, resulting in an uncontrolled discharge of oil. Immense precautions are taken to prevent blowouts. Nevertheless, accidents happen occasionally and great quantities of oil may be released into the sea before the blowout is brought under control. According to the United Nations Human Development Report, around 6,817 oil spills occurred between 1976 and 2001. So, all of the causes of the oil spill that we see are surrounding either the operational discharges or accidental discharges. Now, if you look at the accidental discharges, the amount of accidental discharge is huge, and therefore, the focus has been not only on operational discharges, but also on the precautionary measures to be brought in place as far as accidental discharges are concerned. Now, what are these measures? What are the requirements? What are the conditions that the people, the organs, the bodies, the states, the coastal ones or the flag states are to comply as far as such oil pollution mitigation is concerned? So, we will look first at the international conventions and then how India has taken care of maintaining the menace of oil pollution or protecting any oil pollution from happening. So, the international conventions on oil pollution, marine based oil pollution is an international problem and can be categorized as collective action problem. The International Convention for the Prevention of Pollution of the Sea by Oil Pool was adopted under the auspices of IMCO, that was later amended in 62, 69 and 71. Oil Pool played the central role for the period of 54-71, which was superseded by the International Convention for the Prevention of Pollution from Ships in 1973 as modified by the Protocol of 1978. Both Oil Pool and MARPOL embody standards specifically relating to oil pollution caused by international discharges from ships or accidental discharges which are avoidable by improving tanker design and operating procedure. Prevention measures mainly focus on the technical requirements such as ship structure standards and safety standards, which should be enforced by the contracting states. Both the conventions try to ensure compliance with these standards by making provisions for survey and certification of ships and enforcement by state parties. Realizing the importance of the international cooperation in matters relating to exchange of information respecting the capabilities of states to respond to oil pollution incidents, the preparation of oil pollution contingency plans, the exchange of reports of incidents of significance which may affect the marine environment or the coastline and related interests of states, and research and development respecting means of combating oil pollution in the marine environment. An international convention on oil pollution preparedness, response and cooperation was entered into in 1990. So, we see that different conventions focusing on different aspects of the ship, focusing on different aspects of the responsibilities of the coastal state and that of the flag state. as far as not only the construction and the standards of the ship is concerned, but also the other operational standards that must be undertaken by the flag state as well as the coastal states. Now, the preamble of the OPRC, that is the Oil Pollution Preparedness Response and Cooperation, includes a number of provisions of relevance to general rules of international environmental law, noting the importance of precautionary measures and prevention in avoiding oil pollution in the first instance. So, we see invocation of precautionary principle, as well as we will see in the upcoming slides the invocation of polluter pays principle through the liability regime. So, as far as precautionary principle is concerned, we see its application coming into being in 1990 as far as the oil pollution is concerned through OPRC, and here it notes the importance of precautionary measures and prevention in avoiding oil pollution in the first instance, and taking account of the polluter pay principle as a general principle of international environmental law. The convention commits parties to take all appropriate measures in accordance with its provisions to prepare for and respond to an oil pollution incident. So, the view or the eyes or the lenses through which all of this is to be viewed is no more economic, or is no more dependent, or is no more focused on economic and trade related aspects, but also has to be viewed from environmental aspect. So, once it is viewed from the lenses of environment, the protection of environment also comes to the fore, and a balanced approach also has to be taken as far as economic aspect and trade related aspects are concerned, and balanced with environmental protection aspect. So, it is important to note that OPRC's provisions are applicable to ships, offshore units, seaports and oil handling facilities. Prior to OPRC, there were regional agreements on similar lines, such as the Bonn Agreement for Cooperation in Dealing with Pollution of the North Sea by Oil and Other Harmful Substances 1983, the Copenhagen Agreement between Norway, Denmark, Finland and Sweden concerning cooperation in taking measures against pollution of the sea by oil in 1971. UNCLOS requires the states to cooperate in the implementation of existing international law and the further development of international law relating to responsibility and liability for the assessment of and compensation for damage and the settlement of related disputes, as well as where appropriate development of criteria and procedure for payment of adequate compensation, such as compulsory insurance and compensation funds. Following the Torrey Canyon disaster, an international conference held at Brussels adopted the International Convention on Civil Liability for Oil Pollution Damage 1969, which is also known as CLC, Civil Liability Convention. The Civil Liability Convention imposed strict but limited liability on owners of ships from which oil was discharged for cleanup costs and private damages. So, the kind of liability regime that we see in oil pollution is a strict liability, is based on a strict liability, wherein if any oil pollution takes place, irrespective of whosoever's fault, even if it was an accident and without any intention, or fault theory without coming into being, the liability will be that of the operator or the ship owner. So, in that particular case, the liability is strict. However, in order to safeguard the interest of the shipping industry, it has been limited, and the extra liability then will be paid from the fund. So, we also have a fund convention, wherein the ship owners contribute into this particular fund in order to compensate any oil spill that takes place anywhere around the globe and wherever such fund is applicable. So, the CLC imposes strict but limited liability on owners of ships from which oil was discharged for cleanup costs and private damages, and introduced compulsory liability insurance. 2 years later, the International Convention on the Establishment of an International Fund for Compensation for Oil Pollution Damage, that is Fund Convention 1971, set up an international fund which provided compensation in excess of the vessel owner's liability under the CLC, or where the owner is insolvent or not liable under the CLC. So, we see three pronged accounts are there. One is upon the ship owner, the other one will be paid by the insurance company or insurance company on behalf of the ship owner, and then we have an international Fund. Further, the CLC 1969 was amended by a protocol in 1976, which entered into force in 1981 and simply changed the unit of account used in the convention. Another amendment was made by a protocol in 1984, which did not enter into force. The IMO conference in 1992 adopted the protocol of 1992 to amend the CLC 1969. After entering into force of CLC 1969 and CLC protocol 1992 are to be read together as single instrument as the International Convention on Civil Liability for Oil Pollution Damage, that is now CLC 1992. In the year 2001, International Convention on Civil Liability for Bunker Oil Pollution Damage was adopted to adopt uniform international rules and procedures for determining questions of liability and providing adequate compensation in case of pollution resulting from the escape or discharge of bunker oil from ships. Now, we will look at the liability and the compensation regime. Liability under common law principle. Victims of oil spill are thus multiple in number and varied in their degree of effect on them. Costs involved in cleanups are massive. Multiple parties are there. So, let us say there is an oil spill that has happened. If the oil reaches to the shore and if the shore or the coastal area where the oil has reached is a touristic area, and because of this oil spill the hotels are now closed, the tourism industry is adversely affected. In such a situation, how will the tourism industry be compensated for this particular oil spill? So, the provisions have been made to make payments to these tourism industry associated individuals, that may be hotel owners or that may be shack owners or any other industry that is being run in that particular coastal area. It is difficult to recover such a huge amount of claim on cost from the ship owner or the one responsible under negligence or nuisance or trespass, etc. Thus, it is almost impossible to seek exact or appropriate remedy under common law regime. For example, in case of an accident involving a ship vessel, there is the owner of the cargo, owner of the ship, party who has chartered the ship for voyage, the ship manufacturer, the insurer or party responsible for the maintenance of the ship. Also, a ship can be registered in one state and could be flying under the flag of convenience of some other state. An oil tanker can be owned by one company and could be chartered by another company. In case of an offshore installation, the oil platform could be owned by one corporation and could be licensed to another company for drilling oil. So, we see that different variables can come into being as far as imposition of liability is concerned. So, let us take the example of vessel Erika, which went down the Bay of Biscay in December 1999. After 8-year litigation on 16 January 2008, the Criminal Court of Paris rendered the judgment and extended criminal and civil liability for oil pollution beyond the traditionally liable ship owner to include the vessel's classification society and her oil company charter. The court found culpable conduct by each of these maritime safety chain entities and found that this conduct caused or contributed to the oil pollution. It was for the first time that apart from the ship owner and insurer, the liability was extended to the classification society and charterer alike. The judgment can be said to be groundbreaking in the sense that it signals giving a stern warning to ship owners, managers, classification societies and all companies alike. Adhere to safe shipping practices or face criminal charges and potentially limitless civil liability for endangering seafarers and causing harm to the environment. Apart from the issues of standing and cause of action, question arises as to the recovering damages for the injury to destruction of or loss of natural resources not subject to property rights. Assessing damages to injury to natural resources is a complex issue as it is difficult to evaluate market value of the same. Some methods of assessing damages are on the basis of economic valuation techniques or the cost of restoration matter. It is interesting to see the approach of United States in the case of Amoco Cadiz oil spill. In response to this spill, claims were submitted by the French state and local governments for damage to unowned natural resources, damage to whom were estimated to be at 4.8 million US dollar. The claim was an attempt to evaluate this species killed in the intertidal zone by the oil spill and to claim damages in accordance with that value determination. the claims were rejected by the US court because the resources claimed to be damaged were subject to the principle of res nullius and is not compensable for lack of a standing of any person or entity to claim thereof. So, the court said that since the property was not belonging to anyone, it was res nullius, res means property, nullius not belonging to anyone and also not to any particular community. So, the claim will not stand. Therefore, the court concluded that neither the state nor the communes has a standing to assert claims for damage to the ecosystem. International liability and compensation regime also gives us the specific regime wherein the ship owners has voluntarily taken up the task of compensation. How that has been done we will look at, and what are the different instruments and agreements that they have signed on their own. So, measures aiming at prevention ex ante and on other hand measures aiming at compensation ex post. The prevention of marine pollution is subject inter alia to the Oil Pole and MARPOL conventions. The issue of civil liability and compensation for oil pollution is mainly regulated by international conventions developed within the framework of IMO by the CLC and FUN convention. Apart from the IMO governed convention, the major tanker owners of the world agreed to a voluntary scheme on liability, that is TOVALOP, Tanker Owners Voluntary Agreement Concerning Liability for Oil Pollution, which was supplemented in 1971 by CRISTAL, which is known as Contract Regarding an Interim Supplement to Tanker Liability for Oil Pollution, an agreement between cargo owners, the oil companies to create fund to support the cost of cleaning up which arises after oil spill. Now, this is a voluntary regime, and as we see, TOVALOP and CRISTAL together formed a voluntary scheme to settle the question of liability and financial cover of the cost oil spillage. The main effect of TOVALOP was to impose upon tanker owners which are a party to it an obligation to remove a spillage of oil or to reimburse government for its costs in removing the spill. There was no liability in case the owner took all reasonable care to avoid the spill. The aim of TOVALOP was not to cover the claims for damage caused by the spill, but the costs incurred by the owners or by a government of taking action to remove it or threat of it. Removal means reasonable measures for preventing or minimizing damage by pollution, which itself is defined as including only physical contamination and excluding fire, explosion, consequential and ecological damage. TOVALOP was administered by Tankers Owners Pollution Federation. TOVALOP imposed limited liability. CRISTAL was simply a method of establishing a fund of money provided by the oil companies as cargo owners, which can supplement the liabilities imposed on tanker owners by TOVALOP or by the CLC, that is Civil Liability Convention. Unlike TOVALOP, parties to CRISTAL were not the tanker owners, but the various oil companies engaged in the production, refining, marketing, storing, trading or terminaling of oil, or those who receive oil in bulk for its own consumption. CRISTAL was limited in its application to spills from tankers that are at that time carrying oil in bulk. Ballast runs were not covered in this particular agreement or in this particular coverage. In February 1997, both the voluntary agreements expired and were not renewed, keeping in view the introduction of the new international civil liability regime. Now, as far as the civil liability regime is concerned, given the difficulties in establishing the direct liability of states in relation to environmental damage under the state responsibility or liability regime, an alternative system has been developed based on the civil liability regime. These regimes recognize the competence of national courts either in the state where the damage was caused or in the state of nationality of the polluter to decide cases regarding the liability of the actual parties causing damage outside the state in which they are based. Such decisions thus become enforceable in other states parties to the agreement. Most important feature of civil liability regime are strict liability of the operator, limitation of this liability after certain ceiling, channeling of liability and mandatory insurance or other form of financial security to cover the liability of the operator. And therefore, in 1969-1992 CLC started governing the liability of ship owners for oil pollution damage, more of which we have already discussed. The amount to which ship owners can limit. Now, we have been talking about limitation of liability, but what is the amount up to which this limitation will work. So, the amount to which ship owners can limit the liability was effectively increased by 50% from November 1, 2003, now ranges from 4.51 million SDR, that is 7 million US dollars for small ships up to 5,000 GT to 89.77 million SDR, which amounts to 140 million US dollars for large tankers. However, ship owners are deprived of the right to limit their liability if the pollution damage results from the ship owner's personal act or omission, committed with the intent to cause such damage, or recklessly and with the knowledge that such damage would probably result. Claims for pollution damage may, under the convention, be brought directly against the insurer. Claims for pollution damage under the 1992 CLC can be made only against the registered owner of the ship concerned. This does not preclude victims from claiming compensation outside the convention from persons other than the owner. However, the convention prohibits claims against the servants or agents of the owner, the members of the crew, the pilot, or any other person performing services for the ship. Any charter, manager or operator of the ship, or any person performing salvage operations or taking preventive measures. This prohibition does not apply if the pollution damage resulted from the personal act or omission of the person concerned, committed with the intent to cause such damage, or reckless and with knowledge that such damage would probably result. The compensation payable from the 1992 fund for a single incident is limited to an aggregate amount which was till November 1st to 2003 totaled 203 million SDR, that is approximately 317 million US dollars, including the sum actually paid by the ship owner or the insurer under 1992 Civil Liability Convention. What are the measures that India has taken with respect to oil spill? Let us look at that. So, oil spills are not uncommon on Indian coast. Some of them go unnoticed in the media because of lesser degree of damage caused to the environment. In 2010 itself, apart from the heavily publicized MV Chitra, there was an oil spill incident reported near Gopalpur in Odisha, when approximately 8 tons of oil escaped from the vessel MV Malavika. In 2009, 2 maritime accidents rang alarm bells of possible spills in Mangalore and Paradip. However, because of swift action undertaken by the concerned agencies in mitigating the oil pollution threats and quick cleanup action, there were no environmental disasters of high magnitude. In November 2009, the 14th National Oil Spill Disaster Contingency Plan, also known as NOSDCP, and preparedness meeting stressed on the need to review preparedness and response capabilities with a view to prepare all agencies to respond to any contingency which may arise out at sea. So, we see this preparedness response is in compliance to the international law as far as precautionary measures are concerned. So, also in the wake of the mystery oil spill affecting large tracts of Gujarat and Maharashtra coast, an urgent requirement of setting up a modern laboratory for undertaking oil fingerprinting was expressed. The spill in May 2010 highlighted the hazards of the offshore oil exploration and production and posed an important question as to the preparedness of the state in case if an accident of the magnitude of BP occurs in Indian waters. Are we prepared to tackle the menace which is a byproduct of technological advancement and development? The answer to this is in the 15th National Oil Spill Disaster Contingency Plan, which was held in the shadow of BP disaster, deliberated upon establishing Tier 1 facilities in major ports, establishment of oil spill response organization for tackling large oil spills, preparation of contingency plan by coastal states for oil pollution, legislative efforts for NOSDCP, establishment of coastal bioshield, ocean monitoring through satellites, port reception facilities, utilization of oil cess funds, and etc. So, a number of steps have been taken as far as the oil spill response is concerned. So, and also we see that IMO has a 3-tiered response concept classification, wherein Tier 1 provides for arrangements by the individual ports and oil handling facilities to deal effectively with a small operational spills, that is up to 700 tons. Tier 2 provides for the pooling of government or privately owned resources at a local level to respond incident which may exceed either in size, complexity, or due to its remote location. Tier 3 provides for arrangements for a combined national and international response to a major oil spill that cannot be dealt with effectively under Tier 1 arrangements. Cooperative arrangements have been established between groups of oil companies for responding to such events. Now, what are the actual actions that are taken. So, we see at a number of times at regular intervals meetings are undertaken by the respective authorities, respective stakeholders, and action plan is created, and that action plan is implemented, and in the next meeting what implementation has happened, what all targets were achieved is regularly discussed. So, we will see that actionable points of 21st NOS-DCP and preparedness meeting. Preparation of local contingency plan coastal states UT to progress local contingency plan for early promulgation and initiate necessary steps to form the local action group and local action group support team for shoreline response to oil spills as per NOS-DCP. Now, as part of a local contingency, coastal state may also pursue provision of trailer mounted inventory for shoreline response to oil spills. Regional commanders may continue to render guidance and support to the state governments. Fitment of oil detection system is critical for early detection of accidental unreported oil spill. All ports and oil agencies are to undertake fitment at an early date. All regional commanders are to monitor the progress. Response to oil spills. After the adoption of the OPRC convention by the IMO in 1990 with final act and 10 resolutions and promulgation of the convention in 1995, India became one of the few countries that readily accepted the convention, and we have seen how the preparedness aspect is getting implemented also. Immediately India started working on its provisions for compliance and promulgated its National Contingency Plan on Oil Spill Response. The Indian Coast Guard is the national authority under the National Oil Spill Disaster Contingency Plan NOS-DCP for coordination of response to oil spills in Indian waters. The Coast Guard is the national agency for ensuring marine environment security in India. It involves protection and preservation of the environment and prevention and control of pollution. Coast Guard service was crystallized in India by passing the Coast Guard Act in the Parliament 1978. The maritime zones of India are divided into 3 regions: West, East and Andaman Nicobar. These regions are further divided into 11 districts, and separate targets have been placed with the separate Coast Guard teams. As far as liability regime is concerned, Merchant Shipping Act deals with liability regime, more or less implementing the civil liability convention that we have. So, we see that MSA applies to every Indian ship wherever it is, and every foreign ship while it is at a port or place in India or within the territorial waters of India or any marine areas adjacent thereto over which India has exclusive jurisdiction in regard to control of marine pollution. And it has part 11 dealing with the liability regime, and it provides for all the rules that have to be taken care of concerning the safety of ship in marine adventure, including life saving appliances, radio requirements, fire appliances, signaling appliances, safety certificates and seaworthiness. So, precautionary measure is also coming into being. As far as section 334 is concerned, it prohibits an unworthy ship to be sent into the sea, thereby endangering life of any person, and makes the master of the ship who knowingly takes such a ship to sea liable unless he proves that such a voyage was reasonable and justifiable under the circumstances. We have dealt in the previous lectures in detail as far as these precautionary measures are concerned. Now, as far as liability in case of pollution from ships is concerned, part 10 of the act fixes liability in proportion to fault of parties in case of collision and maritime accidents. In case if consequent to an accident, the owner is made to pay damages exceeding the proportion of his fault, then the owner may by way of contribution recover the amount of the excess from owners of other ships. The interplay of section 286 and 352 of the act is to also be kept in mind while examining liability in accidents of oil spill by ships, as where section 286 proceeds to create the liability regime, whereby if any damage to person or property arises from the non-observance by any ship of any of the collision regulations, the damage shall be deemed to have been occasioned by the willful default of the person in charge of the ship. Whereas section 352I talks about or stipulates that no liability for pollution damage shall attach to the owner if he proves that the pollution damage was wholly caused by an act or omission done with the intent to cause such damage by any other person. The owner may limit his liability in respect of any oil pollution damage arising from any one or more incidents as may be prescribed. The Supreme Court of India in World Tanker Corporation and S&P Shipping Services Private Limited pointed out that the whole purpose of limitation of liability is to protect an owner against large claims far exceeding the value of the ship and cargo, which can be made against him all over the world in case his ship meets an accident causing damage to cargo to another vessel or loss of personal life or personal injury. There are other provisions that deals with liability convention, such as section 352, which insist on mental element or knowledge for the purpose of fixing liability. Then we see that in addition to 352 I and J, which form provides which provides for the limitation of liability of the owner by virtue of 352 J, precludes the owner from limiting liability in case of negligence. Any owner desiring to avail himself of the benefit of limitation of liability must make application to the High Court for the constitution of a limitation fund. Such fund may be constituted either by depositing the sum with the High Court or by furnishing a bank guarantee or such other security as in the opinion of the High Court is satisfactory. The fund is the beneficiary of any right of subrogation arising from payments of damage which any claimant has against any other person. The High Court consolidates all claims against the fund, including those claims which arise by reason of subrogation against other interest. All ships carrying 2000 tons or more oil in bulk as cargo are required to supply a certificate confirming liability insurance. Any certificate issued outside India by a competent authority is also accepted at any port or place in India. Now, there are other provisions such as section 352W, 356K, which empowers the central government to take appropriate measures, and we have liability for pollution from tanks of vessels, where bunker convention also comes into being. The Marpol convention also finds its implementation in the domestic legal system. Then the India also has liability in regime pertaining to liability in case of pollution from offshore installations, especially after the BP oil damage. So, different legal measures are available in the Merchant Shipping Act, especially under article 286, then 352 and 356 in detail are provided to take care of the menace of oil pollution, and any such notice, if may be required, the person on whom it is served to take action for preventing the escape of oil. So, when such oil pollution is found, the action is to be taken for removal of oil or noxious liquid substance, action for removal of oil slicks on the surface of sea, action to disperse the oil slicks on the surface of sea surface, and different various actions are to be or exercises are to be undertaken to prevent any type of oil pollution that might be happening due to either offshore installation or coming out of any accidental or operational discharges. Now, if you look at India's position with respect to oil discharge and oil pollution, we see that a significant compliance has been met out with respect to not only precautionary principle, but also with respect to polluter pays principle. And under the both regimes of larger principles, India also looks positive towards the compliance of international law, not only towards the precautionary part, but also towards the liability part. A little more is required to be done with the passage of time. Certainly, stringent measures will come into being, environment will be given preference, especially the marine environment, whenever we talk about oil spill. So, with this I conclude the class on marine pollution with respect to oil, wherein we have discussed about the international law and briefly about the Indian position and Indian law with respect to oil pollution, taking into account the precautionary part and the polluter pays principle part. With this, I thank you for your patient listening. Namaskar.